Hey everyone, it's Marty. A quick disclaimer. The plant medicines discussed in this episode are presented for informational purposes only. Do not use any plant medicines or substances without first consulting a medical professional. Back in 1973, when I was in elementary school, my biggest fear was going to high school. Seriously, I was completely terrified and, looking back, even a little suspicious of teenagers. I was afraid someone would put LSD in my drink at lunch when I wasn't looking, and then I'd unknowingly drink it and go crazy, having a bad trip. See, I'd watched a movie with my babysitter called Go Ask Alice. The movie was adopted from an anonymously written book, and the book claimed it was an authentic diary of a shy 15-year-old teenage girl who had moved to a new town with her family and ended up with the wrong crowd. I remember there were two scenes where she unknowingly drank soda that had been laced with LSD, and things got really crazy. Spoiler alert, and not like you're going to go watch this movie or anything, but I'll just tell you right now, it's kind of like a watered-down version of Reefer Madness. William Shatner plays the girl's father, and Andy Griffith is the priest, if that tells you anything. She ends up dying of a drug overdose. No one knew if it was accidental or intentional. But according to Snopes, the whole diary thing wasn't true at all. Not one person has ever been identified as knowing Alice. There's even an article in the New York Times decades later suggesting that it was written by a group of writers churning out, quote, real diaries, unquote, by anonymous teens. Now, all the books were about teenagers that had made bad decisions and paid the price through pregnancy and Satan worship, or like this one called Beauty Queen, which is about a girl that flees her alcoholic mother, becomes a stripper, and dies of a heroin overdose. Lots of books like these were being circulated at the time to try to turn youth culture against drugs. But drugs were on the minds of everyone in the late 60s and early 70s. Between 1953 and 1973, the federal government spent millions of dollars to fund over 100 studies of LSD, involving more than 1,700 subjects. And through the mid-60s, psilocybin and LSD were legal and easy to get. There were numerous stories in the headlines of people tripping on LSD and thinking they could fly and jumping out of windows. Grace Slick of Jefferson Airplane went to the same college as Tricia Nixon, the president's daughter. There was an alumni tea held at the White House, and Slick brought Abby Hoffman as her date. She planned to spike President Nixon's tea with LSD, but her efforts were derailed at a security check because Slick had been previously blacklisted by the FBI. A year later, in 1970, Nixon signed the Controlled Substances Act, and most psychedelics were on that list, prohibiting their use for any purpose. And just 3 years after the incident with Grace Slick, Nixon would turn around and plot the murder of Jack Anderson, a political columnist often critical of the president. The plan was to smear LSD on a steering wheel so that Anderson would absorb it through his skin and die in a hallucination-induced crash. It was eventually called off because Nixon changed his mind and had Gordon Liddy and Howard Hunt break into Watergate instead. And this wasn't a one-time deal. It's well documented that Nixon and the CIA considered LSD another weapon in their arsenal. It's hard to fathom, isn't it? That over 40 years ago, a sitting U.S. president was plotting to murder a journalist. Thankfully, a lot has changed since Nixon. Today, serious research in psychedelic-assisted therapy and plant medicine have come back around. And institutions such as NYU, Johns Hopkins, UCLA, and many others are conducting studies administering microdoses of psychedelics. And the research is encouraging. It's yielding positive results for those suffering from depression, addiction, anxiety, as well as physical ailments. In fact, the FDA recently gave the green light to phase 3 clinical trials administering MDMA to those suffering from chronic post-traumatic stress disorder. One plant medicine in particular, ayahuasca, has experienced enormous growth since 2005. Flash forward to 2017, and a complete industry has formed around its use. The plants used in making ayahuasca are native to the Amazon, where ceremonies have been practiced by locals and shamans for thousands of years. Peru's ayahuasca industry in particular is booming, especially in Iquitos. It's where Westerners are going to have an authentic ayahuasca experience.
My name is Daniel Cleland, and I don't really live anywhere at the moment. I have just sold a business that I was running in Peru for the past several years. That's where I was living, and I'm working on a new development in Costa Rica. Property still under contract, so essentially I'm like, you want to talk nomad, I'm exactly that at this point. I'm bouncing between locations with a couple of suitcases.
The business he sold? An ayahuasca retreat in the middle of the Amazon, in Iquitos, Peru to be exact. Now, if you haven't heard of ayahuasca, it's 2 medicinal plants, one being a vine and the other one is a leaf. And the 2 are combined and brewed into a dark tea, and universally reported it tastes pretty foul. Those who have consumed ayahuasca often say that they experience spiritual revelations regarding their purpose, gain insight into the true nature of the universe, and have a shift in consciousness. And it's a booming business. So how does a guy from a small town in Canada end up building and running a plant medicine retreat in Peru?
I grew up in a small town in Ontario, Canada. Fairly normal, kind of expectations in life, largely a middle-class community, not a lot of uber wealthy people, humble people, so kind of followed this standard. It was the golden promise of, go to high school, get some good marks, go to college, get a stable job, and that's kind of it. Raise a family and settle down and be happy. I don't know why, but there's something, I guess, always odd about me. I couldn't really fit in to that comfortably. I'm not sure what it was.
So Daniel ended up taking some courses in college, mostly technical, like electrical, electronics, computer programming.
Didn't really succeed as much as I succeeded in developing a vivid social life. My favorite heavy metal band, Sepultura, that I was a big fan of back in the day, they're a Brazilian band, and some of their songs they sing in these Portuguese lyrics, which, I thought was really cool. I went on a journey to Brazil for the, my first real big, planned everything myself, learned a bit of the language, bought a bunch of maps, and, studied the geography of the country, and then learned how to do all the hostel bookings myself and book all the routes and the transit and everything. I wanted to do something challenging as well. It just seemed like this grand adventure. And that's what I was really craving, having just kind of followed these sequences of steps in my life, which really brought me to this place that wasn't really inspiring to me. Actually saw a whole new dimension of life, which inspired me to get into tourism.
This was a pivotal moment. After returning to Canada, Daniel got a job with G Adventures. They're known for incorporating social and environmental awareness into their tours.
They sent me down to Guatemala. So I trained up in Guatemala and Belize and Mexico. And then they stationed me in Costa Rica and Panama for the first 6 months. So I went down there and started leading groups of up to 15 people around. And the reason they put me in Costa Rica and Panama was because, it's a little bit easier. It's not quite as difficult to travel as some places in South America. And the language, you can get away with having lesser skills in Spanish. So throughout that first 6-7 months I worked there, I was learning Spanish, getting more accustomed to travel, learning how to manage groups of people and the group dynamic and be responsible for everybody and handle situations as they cropped up and, deal with all kinds of interesting scenarios that would challenge me. And then I got to also see these beautiful countries and do all kinds of hikes and rafting trips and biking trips and hanging out on the beach and like partying all over the place and meet some really great people from all over the world and make lots of really great connections within the groups that I was leading. I felt like I'd found something I was good at and that I really enjoyed. Then after working in Costa Rica and Panama for the first 6-7 months, I started running trips in Venezuela and Brazil and even down as far as Uruguay and Argentina.
After spending a year and a half working with G Adventures, Daniel decided it was time to make a move on his own.
I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, having had such a challenging time with not enough vacation, not enough money, and too many hours in the week of work that, are pretty much characteristic of any job in North America. I decided that in order for me to achieve the time freedom and the financial freedom that I wanted, one of the ways to get there would be to be an entrepreneur and have a business. People in my network, family and friends, when they wanted to travel, people would write me asking me for advice. And at one point, I kind of got tired of just giving people advice. And it was my sister who wanted to do a trip with her friends. And I said, listen, why don't I just plan something for you? I'll do up a full itinerary, give you guys a price, and I'll lead it for you. And then you guys just, I get a free trip out of the deal. And put together a package and put together a brand name and a title for the trip. It was called the Panama Pulse. And so I did up a trip package and sent it out to my sister and some other people. And we ran the trip, and it was extremely well done, and it was very fun, and everybody had a life-changing bonding experience. Earlier that year, I started working with ayahuasca as well. And so over time, people who also knew that I was into ayahuasca and also knew that I was into this travel in South America, not only were they asking me for advice about South America, but they were now starting to ask me for advice about ayahuasca. Eventually, serendipitously, it came about that the next thing I was doing was organizing trips for family and friends to go down to South America and experience ayahuasca. But also, I guess my icing on the cake was that I had all this experience designing trips and running trips in just for the sake of adventure. So I started mixing the two of them. 2013 was when I started to branch out outside of my network. And actually hit the kind of the international market, so to speak. And then very quickly after that, things progressed. And by 2014, that is when we built our retreat center in the Amazon.
So I wanted to know specifically how Daniel ended up doing ayahuasca in the first place.
Back in 2009, I was living in Australia, I moved there to continue the education I started in Canada after my 10-year working for G Adventures. That didn't work out. I wasn't able to pay for my tuition. That was right around the financial crisis. And once I got there, it became evident that the economy was turning quite inward in terms of protectionism. It was very difficult for me to get a professional job as a Canadian citizen there. I was up rock climbing. It was at night, where I shouldn't have been, and maybe not under the right kind of mindset or with the right equipment. And I fell off a cliff. I busted my pelvis and my femur quite dramatically. We're talking like compound fractures, the bones exploded out my leg, and I was in real rough shape. Luckily, some people were in the area that heard me calling out for help, so they came over and phoned an ambulance, and the ambulance came and took me to a hospital, which I stayed in for about a month. Had some major surgeries, in a bed for 40 days. You got lots of time to do some real deep thinking on things. When I was traveling Brazil, I was reading Daniel Pinchbeck's 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. So before this supposed end of the world date, according to the Mayan calendar, I was interested in that and worried, and constantly looking at the world and the global problems that just seem to be continuing to accelerate. And so I was reading Daniel Pinchbeck's book, and he discussed ayahuasca and some other psychedelics there. It was just this super powerful psychedelic medicine that show you all of your demons and you purge out all of these entities. And his evocative writing about this experience, it caught my attention, and it stuck in my mind for the next couple of years until I found myself laying in a hospital bed. I was following this author and the work he was doing. It came up when I was in the hospital that they were hosting a retreat in Peru. I endeavored to go to this retreat. Once I left Australia, when I was able to walk again and everything, just able to walk again, actually, I was still in pretty rough shape. I went down to Peru along the way. A whole series of other events happened while I was in Peru, which prevented me from actually accessing the medicine. But what I did get out of that trip was a connection with a guy who was down there doing the medicine, and he invited me. Someone in his circle, one of his friends, were hosting a group of ceremonies over a weekend in New Mexico. I ended up going down, and that was actually where I had my first ayahuasca experience.
These ayahuasca ceremonies aren't just limited to the Amazon. They're actually happening all over the United States and wildly popular in Silicon Valley, LA, and New York. An article in The New Yorker titled "The Drug of Choice in the Age of Kale" estimates that on any given night, there are 100 ayahuasca circles going on in Manhattan.
Now, New Mexico was actually an immersive experience. It was way out there in the range. There was not anything around us except for these expansive, rocky vistas that only ended with these incredible horizons. It was really quite powerful to be out there, in that it was a spiritual land in itself, for sure. The guys were singing and playing their instruments and stuff. I had a great first experience. It was one of the probably top 5. But there's just something about doing it with like real shamans who have had this work in their lineage for years and years and years. And sing in their native languages, and it just brings out a certain authenticity and a certain vibe that that doesn't come across in a ceremony with a neo shaman.
I asked Daniel to go into detail and describe step by step what actually happens at an ayahuasca ceremony.
It's a combination of two different plants. There's a plant called Banisteriopsis capi, and the other one called Psychotria viridis, also known as the ayahuasca vine and the chacruna leaf. And when combined, these two plants complement each other. The vine providing a monoamine oxidase inhibitor, which allows the leaf's properties to be absorbed by the body, by the stomach, without being broken down by the gut. And the properties in the leaf is dimethyltryptamine, or DMT, which produces very, very strong psychedelic states, visionary states. And the harmines, the harmalines in the vine are also quite heart opening and serotonergic. They increase the reception of serotonin. So combined, they open a person up, and then you have these very strong visions that can come through. They don't always come through. And so these plants are brewed together in traditional settings with water in a big pot, cooked over a fire for many hours, while the shamans are inducing songs or ikaros, blessings into the medicine as they cook it. That's the ideal traditional setting. There's a whole array of dis-ease that can be healed with ayahuasca, ranging from physical ailments to emotional ailments to spiritual or psychological ailments, energetic issues. The shamans work in realms that I don't fully understand, but what we see through thousands of firsthand experiences is that people generally come away with a cleaner, energetic body, with a clearer mind, with stronger creativity, with a much more open heart. I know these are kind of intangible things. In terms of addictions and trauma, most addictions are rooted in some type of traumatic event or series of traumatic events in the past. Some of those get buried very deeply. Some of them almost get forgotten. And ayahuasca can help people deal with those traumatic events in an effective way. So ultimately, you're going toward the root cause of the dis-ease rather than applying medications to the symptoms, such as what the bulk of Western medicine is commonly doing across most of the Northern Hemisphere right now. It can just increase a person's well-being, or it can clean out a person's physical body through a series of very strong purges, or it can actually cure clinical diseases such as depression or anxiety. And then there are theories about it going even further to have an impact on cancer and other like Crohn's disease, and other serious physical conditions as well. The theory being that physical conditions are rooted in psychology in a lot of cases. If you fix the psychology behind that, then the body can heal itself. So ayahuasca goes into that domain of the psyche and the spirit and the emotional and the energetic bodies, and helps resolve some of those issues. The shamans work on a kind of a magical level, kind of a spiritual level, and they add this dimension to the experience, which enhances the efficacy of the ayahuasca medicine. And again, I can't really explain because, I haven't trained as a shaman, so I don't want to get too much into making assumptions about how they operate. I can just tell you from experience that they do operate at a higher level and definitely leverage the efficacy of the medicine. I took the first dose, which was like about the size of a shot glass. It was very strong, very syrupy, very thick medicine. It came up from Peru as a concentrate, and it was reconstituted with some water. So quite potent. I think there were about 13 or 14 people in the ceremony. We all took our first dose and waited it out about 2 hours. Not very many people were lucid at the time, and I was, up and walking around. I felt like I had a bit of a surge come on, but then it went away, and I went back to my mattress, and very shortly, like within a matter of a few minutes, that second dose just came on so hard and so fast that the world just became color. They were playing music beside me. It just seemed like it just became this stream of color that was shooting out and going right through my body. The actual psychedelia of the trip started just going off the wall. Very quickly, I began to feel nauseous. I was having all kinds of crazy visions, not just colorful visions, but it's hard to explain. Your mind just starts racing, and it's like you see your whole life flash before your eyes at lightning speed, and you're seeing all these different things. I kept seeing images of my sisters. I tried to focus on that because it was keeping me grounded while my mind was going off into space that I hadn't been before. I got up to purge, but I couldn't actually find my bucket. Within the 15 or 20 minutes or whatever it was since I took my second dose, I had essentially completely lost my motor skills. But I couldn't find it. It in that time, it had also gotten dark. There's nothing I could do. The purge was coming, and I couldn't do anything to stop it. And all over the floor, all over myself. And then I was laying there on hands and knees, and one of the helpers came over at that point and put a bucket under my face. They had a little flashlight that they were using, and then eventually they helped me up and took me out to the restroom facility. But anyways, that's the graphic aspect. There was a lot of psychological growth, believe it or not, that went along with that. It really broke down my ego. I mean, to be completely humiliated and just rendered helpless. That's what it was. I was rendered helpless for a period of time where I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know where I was. I couldn't help myself. And I had these wonderful people there to help me. Out of that ceremony, I discovered the meaning of 5 different words that I didn't really know before, and that was medicine. I cleaned my whole body out. The amount of purging I did that night, it felt like I just had vomited up the last decade of all the poison I'd put in my body and the shitty food that I had eaten. Like I scrubbed myself from the inside out. The definition of love, I really was able to see these images of my family and actually feel this sense of love that I had never really experienced. I mean, I'm sure I had, but not to the extent of experiencing it as an emotion. I also learned how to love myself at a time when I couldn't love myself. The definition of profound. I had never, ever experienced anything that went that deep and pushed my psyche to that level and connected me to such a next level experiential dimension of the universe. Agony. I had never experienced agony like that in my life. Intensity. I never experienced anything that intense in my life. So it just blew my mind. And when I finished that ceremony, I was inspired to share that experience because I thought other people might benefit from it. And that's really what began that journey of, me talking about ayahuasca, promoting it, just for the simple fact that I thought it could help many other people. After this experience in New Mexico, I was committed to the medicine path. I just wanted to work more with it. I thought it was the most amazing thing I'd ever experienced. About 6 months after my first ceremony there, I went down to the place I had originally intended to go to, and ended up volunteering there for a month, getting to work more deeply with medicines. And after that, I started working with another place up in Iquitos, working with the Shipibo shamans, which I actually liked better than any of the other contexts that I had been part of. Their chants and their songs there were no instruments involved. They were doing all of this with their own vocal cords, and I just found it to be really powerful. And I liked the setting. I liked being in the jungle with in this big round ceremonial building, listening to these shamans do their thing. And I found the medicine to just be a lot stronger and just better. Then as I progressed with running my own adventures down there, I started working with Shipibos. And again, I was doing that bit by bit, just working with other facilities for a couple of years, and actually developing relationships in the Shipibo community and in the ayahuasca community. And then when it became time to branch off onto our own, because we were getting so busy and we needed our own place, basically. One of the shamans I was working with, who was employed by another facility, had just recently stopped working there, and so he was free, and I needed a good shaman, and I liked this guy, so we partnered up and brought him into it and built our own place in 2014. We've had people from like 20 plus different countries, mostly Americans, Canadians, Australians, Europeans, but then a scattered handful from Middle East or Asia or Africa.
And as you might imagine, running an ayahuasca lodging facility in the middle of the Amazon comes with its own unique challenges. Here's a clip from Daniel's podcast where he discusses some of these issues with Rak Razum, an experiential journalist, documentary producer, and self-described worldwide psychedelic explorer.
I don't know, ayahuasca's gone mainstream. Elle magazine has been writing it up, and Marie Claire magazine has been writing it up. Like incredibly mainstream magazines and news outlets writing up ayahuasca, and in a way still commodifying it. I remember either the Elle or the Marie Claire magazine, they titled it Walking on Sunshine, and the picture was of a young woman stepping off an urban street with a yellow aura around her. And the article was actually well written by someone who'd actually gone through the experience. But I guess everyone in the West is now targeting the ayahuasca experience to their own sub-demographic. So if it's women, they'll target it to women's issues. If it's people undergoing trauma or Iraqi war vets, they'll target it to Iraqi war vets. Or if it's, soccer mums in Oklahoma, I'm sure there's a ayahuasca experience for them. And you know what? That's great because, many curanderos said to me over time that ayahuasca is like a vine and she's reaching out to embrace the world. And I'm all for that. So I guess what I feel that this third phase of ayahuasca in the West, what we're facing is now a very more practical and pragmatic level of how do we as a community create and sustain these duty of care, best practices, and foundations to support this great influx of interest in ayahuasca around the world. And how do we nurture and make the medicine sustainable? And how do we help make this a global shamanic sacrament?
Well, I can comment on that a little bit because actually there have been a couple of dozen, maybe a few dozen ayahuasca lodges and operators and shamans around in Peru who have recently come together to form the Ayahuasca Safety Association. So this is a legal entity. It's a legal nonprofit society registered in Peru, and essentially what we've done is brought together all of these different operators, in a spirit of goodwill, and ultimately with the sole objective of eliminating accidents and death. Zero death is the goal. And so by bringing everyone together, contributing everybody's knowledge, everybody's experience, drawing up a set of best practices, and of course all the safety, preferred safety steps and screening and everything like that, as well as relationships and legality of the business and relationships with local communities. I think that is indicative of how the industry is maturing and moving away from this kind of like Wild West type of scenario to where it's becoming recognized as a profession and a very effective healing therapeutic practice. So I think that's a step in the right direction.
Daniel describes what it's like doing business in Peru.
I just couldn't believe why things are just so damned complicated and slow and inefficient. And the only reason I can think of is because these massive bureaucratic organizations and all the different agencies that you have to work through to get anything done, each one of them requiring you to go to a notary and bring your passport and get a stamp, and signature, like with everyone else who's involved. It keeps a lot of people employed, I think, and that to me seems to be the only reason why it's continuing like that. If anyone asks for payment up front, that's just an automatic no. The more you pay up front, the lesser the chances of you actually getting the service that you're paying for. So you want to pay, try to pay, if someone asks for 100% up, try to pay 10%. The maximum you go is 50%. I've had a number of experiences with failed endeavors and relationships because of just empty promises or people, who take money and run and that kind of thing. You just have to be so careful. That said, some of the most trustworthy, wonderful people that I've ever met, we were fortunate enough to have working with us.
And like anywhere, time will tell if a place is a good fit for you and your lifestyle.
Peru's a wonderful country. Its natural beauty is unequivocal. The Cusco, the Colca Canyon, the Inca Trail, the Amazon. There's so much untouched Amazon there. So many wonderful natural riches in that country, and the cultural history is also quite amazing. Personally, living there it wasn't my place. Any type of communication services, particularly internet, even in Lima, is difficult to maintain on a reliable level. I'm hosting my own podcast, so that wasn't acceptable for me because I get these high-profile guests on my show, and I'd be sitting in my office in Lima, and of course I paid for the greatest internet you could get there. 50% of the time, I'd be interviewing someone and the internet would be cutting in and out, and there's nothing I could do about it. Sometimes it would work good, sometimes it would not. And so that was causing a significant amount of frustration for me, as well as just doing anything like uploading videos or any type of media production that required a solid internet connection. It made life very frustrating. I guess pet peeves that just really got under my skin over time. Stuff like getting anything into the country. You know, if you make an order for books from Amazon, or, you know, any type of health supplements, or really anything that you want to have shipped in the country, could be a 6-week-long nightmare getting it through customs with a dozen steps, as they call them, trámites. You know, going to the bank to pay a $5.70 fee, but you have to wait in line for 2 hours to have to deposit that into their account, and then it's just one thing after another. That was something that frustrated me quite a bit.
Daniel sold the retreat in Peru and is now transplanting the entire team to Costa Rica to build an authentic Peruvian healing experience.
We found this one property that is like a gem, a diamond in the rough, in an area that is one of the few places that are not super developed in Costa Rica. So this is like a family retreat. It's never been a hotel or anything. 21-acre property. It's right on a ridge between two different beaches. So if you can imagine two beaches that come out to a point, and at this point, there's like a, 50-meter cliff that goes up. It's all volcanic rock. And right at the top of that cliff, there's a ridge that goes backwards away from the ocean. So we have like this big rectangular property that goes along this ridge, and then in an L shape goes down to one of those white sand beaches. So at the top of this, we have all this kind of like overgrown, jungly, wonderful property that has a view from the cliff up over the ocean. So you can see off in the distance like the islands and this like massive oceanscape. But then within like 3 minutes walk, you have access to these two gorgeous beaches, which are super low traffic because they're in this undeveloped area. In a way, you've got people that would only go to Peru to drink ayahuasca because they want that degree of authenticity, and that's fine. We can't replicate that completely in Costa Rica. But then there's also this huge segment that won't go to Peru just because, it seems way too far, way too intimidating, way too complicated. They don't trust being out in the jungle, all this kind of stuff. But then you mentioned Costa Rica and they're like, ooh, Costa Rica. Yeah. You can either fly into Liberia or San Jose. It's about an hour and a half drive to the coast. And once you get to the coast in Punta Arenas, you jump on a big ferry boat that cruises across the Gulf of Nicoya. Then you get to the other side of the Gulf in Playa Naranjo or Paquera. Then you jump in a car, and then within 30 minutes you're at property. So it's really a pretty easy journey compared to what it's like getting out to the middle of the Amazon.
They're also working on the final touches of a documentary titled The Plant Teacher. Daniel tells me it's scheduled to be released around the same time as the new retreat opens in Costa Rica. They're looking at spring 2018.
First of all, we filmed a lot of the ceremonial aspects in Peru. So we have the shamans, we have original music from the shamans and everything in the documentary. But then we went to the Psychedelic Science Conference in April that was hosted in Oakland by the MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And we interviewed like most of the headliners there, Gabor Mate, Dennis McKenna, Jim Fadiman, Ken Tupper, Rak Razam. One thing that really inspired me that was unexpected was that most people are also there because they have this deep concern for the world's ecology. And they're very concerned about the way things are going in terms of environment. So, what came out of all those interviews was a very ecocentric message. And then, coincidentally, Amazon Watch has their office located in Oakland. So I was able to go right to their head office and speak with their executive director. And, we were able to discuss some of what's going on down in the Amazon.
I asked Daniel to share some books that have been really pivotal in his development as an entrepreneur.
I got a lot of value out of The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. That book really pushed me over the edge. I might have read it 2 or 3 times. I highlighted passages, I put tags on pages, and I just digested it over and over and over again. That was the motivating force that really made me decide to get out of the world of the employee and move into the world of the entrepreneur. I also read another book called Making Ideas Happen by Scott Belsky, and I felt those two were very complementary in that, Making Ideas Happen gave me some strategies to help keep me to task when I started getting these ideas to develop my own ideas and my own business plans, just managing projects, how you break your life into projects. So those two really had a pivotal kind of influence on me back when I was getting started.
This guy has some serious drive. In the last year, he's written a book, started a podcast, created a documentary, and is in the midst of creating Playa Medicina, the new retreat in Costa Rica. Given the trajectory of his adult life, I wanted to know exactly what motivates him.
I take a lot of pleasure in being able to create something for my team, my tribe, so that we can, do something that we believe in, do something that intrinsically satisfies us, and earn a living doing it. My tribe is, I'm nothing without my team. And so that is one of my primary driving forces between everything. I also, I want to contribute whatever I can with my life, leave something that lasts, beyond me. It's something that people can take benefit from. I'm also just very, creative in a way, and I like to produce things. Like I like to produce things that sound good and look good, and I just want to do something valuable, I guess,
So what's next? What's the long game here?
I have a long-term vision for our Costa Rica project. We're going to turn it into a permaculture property. So as soon as we get it, we'll be aggressively planting different fruit-producing trees as well as medicinal plants. And ideally in 5 to 10 years, we're just going to have this wonderful piece of property that you could almost live off of without any outside food sources. There's no easy road in this life, especially in the world of, entrepreneurship. There's a lot of uncertainty. You gotta put laser-like focus into these pivotal projects, and that's where I'm at right now. And then, just hopefully just keep on keeping on, I guess.
That's going to wrap it up for us. You can find everything in our show notes on our website at www.expatsandwich.com. The best place to keep up with Daniel is at danielcleland.com. That's CLELAND. That's where you can find his book, the podcast, and previews of the new documentary. You can also find him on Twitter at @PulseDaniel, PULSE, Daniel. I'm a Twitter follower, and I can assure you, he by far shares some of the most interesting posts in my feed. Thanks to Patreon members Louise Walker, Tim Hurst, Jay Shen, and @Honorable Husband. We are incredibly appreciative of your generous support. Expat Sandwich is produced by Marty Walker.